Free agency has been fun, and now it's time to recap it from a fantasy football perspective. I'm Jamie Eisenberg, that's Dave Richard, that's Heath Cummings, and it is time to get into all the moves that have happened over the last several days, last several weeks, in fact, leading us to this point as we start to see rosters unfold, how they're going to look heading into the 2020 season. We know the NFL draft still is yet to come, but the moves have been happening, and they're going to impact fantasy in a big, big way. Gentlemen, let's start with the biggest move of all from the biggest name of all. The GOAT, Tom Brady, is on the move. He's going to get his physical done, and everything's going to be fine. We hope he'll be a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. May get the word before the show is over that the move is official. So we got Tom Brady changing team, first time in 20 years. Dave, what do you think? Is he going to be a good fantasy quarterback, great fantasy quarterback, or could he still be mediocre like we saw last year?
He's not going to be anything like we saw last year. I think he's in line to have a big bounce back year. And look at the offense that he's falling into. You've got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin catching passes. That's a lot better than Julian Edelman and Philip Dorsett. And there's other players on top of that, some that are currently in Tampa Bay, others that might join them in Tampa Bay. And Bruce Arians, I think, makes the difference here. Bruce Arians, a very aggressive play caller when he did call plays. Now it's Byron Leftwich doing it. But you know that Bruce Arians is calling some of those shots as well. I think Arians is going to ask Tom Brady to just keep throwing the football, aim a little bit deeper than he has been in the past, and I think he's going to come up with great numbers, like him as a top 12 fantasy quarterback.
You have him top 12. Heath and I have him in the top 10, so we'll see if that's going to actually live up to fruition. But Heath, when we look at this receiving core here, there's a ton of options. We talked about this, about the potential of Brady going here, going there. When we talked about Tampa Bay, you said you might be a little bit concerned about Mike Evans, but love this for Chris Godwin. Is that the case now that it's officially happened or expected to happen?
Yeah, and you mentioned those deeper targets downfield. Brady's been very good on those throws. He just doesn't do it very often because he doesn't want to take those hits that generally come with them. So I do think if there's anyone who loses here, it's likely to be Mike Evans, in that he doesn't see as many deep targets, and we don't know if those deep targets will be quite as good as they were with Jameis Winston. I do think it's great for Chris Godwin. It kind of gives O.J. Howard maybe one last chance that we can believe in him possibly breaking out in 2020. But Evans is the one you have to be concerned about. He's consistently been over 16, 17 yards per reception. We haven't seen that from a Brady receiver in quite some time.
The one thing that I've been saying all along is that I think what Brady may lose in terms of arm strength compared to Jameis Winston, or the chances to take the ball, the shots taking down the field, is he'll do some different things that Jameis could never do because of experience. You know, moving the defense around with his eyes, changing some things at the line of scrimmage that he may see. Bruce Arians will give him some more freedom. And there was a report from the NFL Network from Mike Silver that Bruce said that he'll sort of work with Brady to sort of see things that make him comfortable. So maybe that changes how we saw the Bruce Arians offense and what we saw from Tampa Bay last year in regard to some of these guys, hopefully O.J. Howard, because we know that Brady has a good track record with tight ends. You may recall Rob Gronkowski, once a great fantasy option. The backfield is something we've got to keep an eye on. Dave mentioned Deion Lewis is somebody who could be out there that the Patriots are looking at. Ronald Jones right now, if he is the guy, number 2 running back, still number 3?
Yeah, I'm not believing it, so number 3.
I mean, if he's still the guy in May and they don't draft somebody good and they don't sign somebody good and they don't trade for somebody, then yeah, he's a number 2 running back.
Yep, could be a big boost for him. The biggest thing that Ronald Jones will have to do, because it's Tom Brady at 42, going to be 43 when the season starts, pass protection. Got to make sure that you keep people off of the Hall of Fame quarterback. So Brady not the only guy that we're talking about here. The Patriots are going to be looking for a quarterback as well. And so this is a team that could be struggling. Mostly, though, it's going to impact the guys who are still there, because whether they bring in Andy Dalton, which is something that we've heard, whether they go out and make an aggressive move and get Cam Newton or Jameis Winston, draft a guy, we don't know what exactly their plan is at quarterback. I'm sure it's Bill Belichick. He's going to have a plan. But what does this do for the guys there, specifically Julian Edelman?
I mean, right now we don't know what it does for him because we don't know who's going to be there, but it's probably going to be a downgrade for Julian Edelman
it's a downgrade.
and James White. Because if only because even if they go, I think Jameis Winston's probably the best passer available. Even if they go sign Jameis Winston, he's not generally looking for those checkdowns to James White and Julian Edelman. He wants to go down the field more. So I think the best guy for Edelman's probably Andy Dalton. We'll see if he can pry him away from the Bengals.
Anybody taking Andy Dalton as a starting fantasy option?
No.
Anybody taking a Patriot as a starting fantasy option?
Yes.
Depending on the quarterback, I could see Edelman as a low-end number 2 wide receiver in PPR.
I will not be drafting a Patriot right now, as we sit here today, as
right.
a starter. Reserve, yes. Starter, no. Dave, your boy, he's on the move. Phillip Rivers is now a member of the Indianapolis Colts, signs a 1-year, $25 million deal to replace Jacoby Brissett, as we know, really replacing Andrew Luck, because Brissett unfortunately didn't get the chance to prove he could be the long-term starter. So they go and get the veteran guy in Phillip Rivers. You could debate whether he's a Hall of Famer. That really doesn't matter for us. Is he a starting fantasy quarterback in Indianapolis?
He's not. And it has more to do with just the talent pool of quarterback. It's overflowing. I'd rather have Brady in Tampa Bay than Phillip Rivers with Indianapolis. But there are going to be some weeks, and I bet they're going to be early on this year, where we look at Phillip Rivers and we say, wow, I'd like to have him in my fantasy lineup. He starts off hot. He's done that the past few seasons with the Chargers. I would expect that to be the case now that he's with the Colts as well. It's just a matter of whether or not he can keep it up and whether he can keep those interceptions down. He had 20 of them last year. If you ignore that number, and that's a big number to ignore, I think that you'll see that he really wasn't that terrible of a quarterback just in general. Fantasy-wise, slow finish really did hurt him. Turnovers really did hurt him. I think he's going to be a streaming quarterback and a number 2 option in Superflex and 2 QB leagues.
Offensive line did hurt him, and this is one of the best in football, as we know. Heath, when you look at the talent in Indianapolis now, so T.Y. Hilton, injured season, got off to a good start, mostly touchdown related. Jack Doyle now the only tight end in town for now. Eric Ebron, they let him go as a free agent. You have some nice young players in Paris Campbell and Nyheim Hines out of the backfield, and Marlon Mack, what he does running the ball. Who benefits the most from this?
I think it's probably T.Y. Hilton, and maybe Nyheim Hines. The problem with Hines, he benefits a lot going from maybe running back 55 all the way up to running back 35, but he's not into that starter conversation. Right. It's kind of the exact opposite situation as Brady going to Tampa Bay, because Brady all of a sudden surrounded by much better weapons, but maybe worse for a couple of those weapons. I think Rivers is going to be a boost over Jacoby Brissett for everyone. But those guys are so much worse than what he had in Los Angeles that I think it really hurts him. He's not in my top 20 quarterbacks.
Does T.Y. Hilton become a starting fantasy wide receiver again?
A low-end number 2 receiver, I think you could see that. With Phillip Rivers firing at him, and I think he'll still get a lot of targets in this offense. I do want to see what receiver they add. I think they've got to add another guy to this mix.
And if they don't add another tight end, this offense has always targeted tight ends heavily, and Phillip Rivers has always targeted tight ends heavily. If it's Jack Doyle and the rest of the guys they have on the roster right now, I think Jack Doyle's a low-end number 1 tight end.
Has a chance to be. Both Doyle and Hilton have to prove they can stay healthy after battling through some injuries last year. Paris Campbell has to stay healthy as well. Disappointing rookie campaign. I'm with you, though. Nyheim Hines took a huge leap, 20 spots in my rankings as well. So hopefully we see what I've been saying all week long is like a poor man's Austin Eckler. He's not going to do what Eckler did, but we know that Phillip Rivers is a statue. He's not going to run. He's going to dump the ball off. And in passing situations, unfortunately, Marlon Mack comes off the field. Nyheim Hines goes on the field. So in PPR leagues, Nyheim Hines could be a flex option for you after not necessarily being a potential player in that category last year. So Heath, we get Teddy Bridgewater going to the Panthers. I know you've said this week on our podcast you like this move.
Love, love, love this move for DJ Moore and for Christian McCaffrey. You look at Bridgewater, he does not throw the ball down the field, but each of his 3 seasons that he started at least 5 games, he's completed at least 64% of his passes. He's very accurate on those short passes. And this is exactly what it seems like they want to do in Carolina, is get their athletes in space. Moore and McCaffrey both have the ability to do that. Not great for Curtis Samuel, probably. He won't be less accurate than Kyle Allen was, but I don't know how many shots you'll see Bridgewater take to him. I think this is a situation where DJ Moore could be a top 5 fantasy wide receiver in PPR formats.
You don't necessarily agree, do you?
I don't. I think that DJ Moore can be good, and I think Curtis Samuel can actually be decent. But I don't want to have Bridgewater as a starting fantasy quarterback. I think he's going to be a distributor. That's what they're looking for in this offense. They're going to play a lot of 4 and 5 wide formations. That's not necessarily a bad thing for McCaffrey. He'll be out there. But these 2 guys are going to be on the field a ton. They're both going to get a lot of targets. It's making plays after the catch. Both of these guys can do it. I don't think that the deep targets are going to be there as much, which is great, because Teddy Bridgewater seems to be a very shy quarterback, likes to keep it short and sweet, and I think it'll work out great. Volume will be key for both of those wide receivers, more better than Samuel, but I'm a little optimistic about Curtis Samuel. I think he's okay.
Just a better price this year. Last year we kind of, probably me more than anybody, drove up the price a little bit, and unfortunately we didn't get a chance to see him for 16 games with Cam Newton. He did not benefit with the Kyle Allen experiment where DJ Moore did. And don't forget, Greg Olsen now gone. Ian Thomas could be a nice sleeper tight end for you as well. Another guy that factors into a lot of these second-tier tight ends that could be number 1 options, Jack Doyle being one that we just talked about with the Colts. So the Panthers are moving on from Cam Newton, not officially yet, but they've allowed him to go seek a trade. Is there any destination, any spot at all that you could see not only Cam Newton, but also we'll extend it to Jameis Winston, who's looking at a new team as well with Tom Brady now in Tampa Bay? But Cam first, is there any spot you could see drafting Cam Newton as a starter?
No, and that's even if he lands in New England and he's got that brain trust coaching staff helping him out. I don't see it for Cam. I think there are too many questions about his health and that's keeping him from finding a new team. His salary also might be a little prohibitive. It's a $19 million cap hit.
Cheap for a starting quarterback.
Is his shoulder right and is his foot right? How much will he run?
It's his foot.
Okay, so this is a guy that we've come to know as a rushing quarterback, and if he's not rushing as much, the totals won't be there for him.
If he's traded, that means he's passing someone's physical, I presume. They think
if he signed also.
Yes, they think he's healthy enough to play football next year. If the New England Patriots think Cam Newton's healthy enough to play football next year, yes, he's going to be my top 12 quarterback. And I would extend that to Jacksonville as well. If he goes to Jacksonville, and I hope it doesn't happen for Gardner Minshew, but if he goes to Jacksonville and they've signed him to be a starting quarterback, then yeah, he's going to be my top 12 quarterback.
Okay, so basically if he gets a starting job, you're going to rank him as a starter?
Yes. Yeah,
Washington too?
Especially if he's traded. Now, if they cut him and somebody gives him a $5 million deal, it's a different deal.
We're not talking about going to
right.
Chicago scenarios off the table at this point, but he's not going to Pittsburgh to back up Ben Roethlisberger.
No.
He's not going to New Orleans to back
Washington,
up
yes.
Drew Brees. If he goes to Washington, he's going there to be the starter because of his track record with Ron Rivera. If he goes to New England, clearly he's going to be the starter. And Jacksonville, most likely he's going to be the starter. So, okay, so you're still on board with him being a starter. You're not. I'm not as well, but that doesn't mean I would not draft him as a high-end number 2 guy to see just what happens, because then he could end up being a fantasy option if he's healthy. What about Jameis Winston? Same scenarios, a lot of the same teams that we're talking about here. I throw Miami in the mix as well if they decide that they want to go that route too.
I guess.
Does Jameis, you like Jameis more than Cam?
No, I like Cam more than Jameis, but I don't like either one of them. And I don't. How much leash does Jameis Winston get on a new team?
He just threw 30 interceptions and finishes the top 5 fantasy quarterback. He's not going to throw 30 interceptions
and he got LASIK.
Almost certainly again. And he got LASIK. He can see better. Yes, if Jameis Winston is acquired by someone and is the starting quarterback, I'm going to have it. He'll be 13 or 14, but he's going to be in that starter consideration. He was awesome for fantasy last year, and really he's been awesome several times in the past when he's been healthy and starting. I know that NFL teams have shied away from him because of the interceptions. I don't care in fantasy. He's scoring a ton of fantasy points. I'm starting him.
The problem is that if he keeps turning the ball over, he's going to get benched. And that's something that couldn't happen last year because Tampa Bay didn't have anybody else to really put on the field instead of Jameis Winston. So I think if he changes teams, he's going to go somewhere where there's going to be another option. And if he costs a team too many games on the field, he's not going to play. And then if he's not playing, he's not getting you any fantasy points.
We talked about this with Lamar Jackson last year. If I'm drafting a low-end starting quarterback, I don't care if he gets benched. I can go stream the position. I'm probably going to stream the position anyways. I want the guy that has the upside, and he has top 3 upside.
In the right scenario.
Yeah.
Last year was the perfect scenario.
Right.
That scenario is now gone, unfortunately. So I don't know New England how that would exactly work. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see him walk off the field after one of his 7 pick sixes that he threw last year, and how Bill Belichick would react to that. I don't think he would get to 7.
He'd say we're on to Jared Stidham.
Yeah, we're on to somebody else, that's for sure. The Bears are on to somebody else potentially as they make the move to trade for Nick Foles from Jacksonville, giving a compensatory 4th-round pick to get the former Super Bowl MVP, and that ties into what the Jaguars are doing right now. So, Dave, I'm going to give you the unfortunate Debbie Downer side of things, the Bears, because we know how Mr. Heath Cummings loves Gardner Minshew. I just want to make note. I know we're spending a lot of time on quarterbacks. We're going to cover every position and all the moves, but we started with Brady, so we just continue to talk quarterbacks here, and that's why we've worked our way to Jacksonville, Chicago, as opposed to talking about maybe DeAndre Hopkins or something.
I think he's a little bit more accurate than Mitchell Trubisky, and so for that reason alone,
you're more accurate than Mitchell Trubisky.
Don't say that. You haven't seen me throw a football. I'm brutal. I think that you could see Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller get plenty of targets still.
Do you think he's
their volume is fine? Oh, they're not bringing him there to watch Mitchell Trubisky play mediocre.
Oh, they're going to let him compete. Do you think Foles will win the job?
I think Foles will win the job, and I think Foles will do a good job managing the offense. Don't know how well they'll run the football this year.
Okay, so forget about Foles. Nobody's drafting Foles.
I agree.
Robinson, better or worse?
Same. Top 15-ish
type
type of fantasy receiver. Miller's a number 3.
Okay, so everything's the same scenario with the Bears.
I think they're almost safer now than they were before.
And now we get to
the
man of the hour, Gardner Minshew. So if I saw your quarterback rankings correctly, it's Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Minshew.
Yeah, it was Watson, but Watson got knocked down with Hopkins trade, so now it's Minshew. No, he's number 14, and he's right in that same range where I'd probably have Cam or Jameis Winston if they got drafted. What he did as a rookie quarterback was good, not great. He had some terrible games as well. Every rookie quarterback that played last year did. That's kind of what we see from them. I think we should expect some improvement. It's going to be really interesting. The error bar gets a little bit wider when you change coordinators. We've seen young quarterbacks really struggle with new offensive systems in their second year. We've seen some young quarterbacks like Jared Goff take off because of a change. Jay Gruden has had success. Andy Dalton was the number 3 quarterback in fantasy his last year with Gruden. Kirk Cousins had 3 straight top 10 seasons with Gruden as his coach. So I think that there is definitely some upside here for Minshew.
I just want to see what they do next.
Yep.
That's the big thing, because if it is Cam, if it is Jameis, if it is Dalton, who's got a track record with Gruden, like you said, then it's bad for Minshew.
For sure.
You know, they're not gonna. They may make them compete, may allow them to compete, but most likely, maybe outside of Dalton, the other 2 guys are coming in to probably take.
Well, yeah, and I think if they trade a draft pick to pay Dalton $17 million, then Minshew's probably starting out behind in that competition. Like if they go get anybody, it's probably bad news for Minshew.
Unless they draft someone, and who knows what that will do. They do have 2 picks in the first round, so maybe they package those to move up and see if they can upgrade over Minshew. But as we know, Minshew was a big fan favorite in Jacksonville because of the mustache, and Heath rocked that look for a little while. Maybe it'll come back. We'll see. All right, so we got a couple other quarterbacks beside Gardner Minshew staying in their respective homes. Dak Prescott, Drew Brees, Ryan Tannehill. Prescott gets the franchise tag. Brees gets a 2-year deal to stay in New Orleans. Ryan Tannehill gets a monster contract to remain the starter in Tennessee. Did it change? Did this change your opinion on these guys at all, the fact that they're staying put? Dak is what for both of you? Top 5 quarterback?
Yep.
Top 3 quarterback?
Number 3 for me.
Number 3 for you. He was number 2 last year in the way he finished behind Lamar Jackson. So where is he for you? Top 5?
He is 4th for me.
4th for you. He's 3rd for me. So I think it's going to be a good situation on top of the fact that they made it a package deal and bringing back Amari Cooper. When you look at the other 2 guys, Ryan Tannehill, Drew Brees, different situations last year. Tannehill took over in Week 7 for Marcus Mariota and finished as just an absolute fantasy star. And Brees had the thumb injury, but he also finished the season very strong. So how do you view these 2 guys? Is Brees still a fantasy starter?
He is for me. Top 10 quarterback. I'm weighing putting him ahead of Deshaun Watson at this point. Wow. I think that Brees continues to put up really good numbers. You saw it last year. I believe he was 2nd in consistency in the entire NFL, ahead of everybody else other than Lamar Jackson. And I think he could continue to keep it going. And I'm expecting New Orleans to add talent to their receiving core in the draft. That'll make him an even better fantasy quarterback.
An interesting thing with Brees, and we know with Tannehill, he's going to be a really low-volume passer in terms of pass attempts, and I don't think there's really any chance at all he repeats what he did in the last 9 or 10 weeks, like the biggest regression, obvious candidate ever. With Brees, it'll be interesting because his volume was pretty good last year in the games he played. We'd seen it trend downward the 2 years before that. So I do worry that his pass volume gets cut into a little bit. And he's a low-end starter, a high-end number 2, just right in that, I wouldn't disagree with 10, but somewhere in that 10 to 14, 10 to 15 range. I'm not sure they'll throw the ball as much as they did last year.
There's one player and one number that sort of stands out to me with Brees. The player is the transition from Mark Ingram to Latavius Murray. The run game was worse. And the number is 25%. And that's the difference from what Alvin Kamara said. He said he was playing on 75% on his injured leg. At 100% plus Latavius Murray, is the run game better, and does that hurt the volume for Drew Brees? Because that's what we saw the past 2 seasons. The run game was fantastic. So Brees is going to be interesting. And again, some of these quarterbacks change from 6 points for passing touchdowns to 4 points for passing touchdowns. Brady, Brees, they get a little bit of a downgrade because they don't run. Whereas somebody, let's say like
Tannehill?
Well, yeah, Tannehill. I mean, he'll run a little bit, but obviously Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, those guys get a significant boost. Those guys are ranked ahead of them, at least for me. I think for a couple of you guys as well. A couple of those guys as well for you guys are ranked ahead of Brees and Brady respectively because of their rushing ability. But we'll talk about that throughout the course of the show as we look at some of these other moves, specifically Kyler Murray, because we're going to be talking about the big trade. DeAndre Hopkins goes to Arizona. Stefon Diggs goes to Buffalo. We're going to break down the wide receiver moves coming up next here on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're breaking down all the free agent moves, some of the trades, and some of the bigger ones have happened at the wide receiver position. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Dave Richard. That's Heath Cummings. And we're talking about, well, one of the strangest trades maybe in NFL history. The Texans traded DeAndre Hopkins and a 4th-round pick to the Arizona Cardinals for David Johnson and a 2nd-round pick this year and a 4th-round pick next year. Still very hard to believe that the Texans are moving on from a 27-year-old wide receiver in the peak of his prime, putting up monster numbers for not just fantasy, but also for the Texans and Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, probably the Michael Jordan crying meme right now. So let's talk about this trade. So Hopkins, his fantasy value does what with this move? I'll start with you, Dave.
I'm optimistic that he can stay as a high volume receiver with a big role in the red zone. You know that's where Arizona struggled a lot last year. And I get it that the Cardinals like to spread the ball around to all their receivers. Last year, Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald each had over 100 targets. I say it changes just a little bit. You don't bring in a guy like DeAndre Hopkins and not feed him the football. I think he's still going to be one of the best receivers in fantasy. Don't mind taking him with a late first-round pick in PPR.
Yeah, there's just so few wide receivers in the NFL each year that get more than 10 targets per game. And Hopkins has had that 4 of the past 5 seasons. The Osweiler season was the only exception. And you look at what the offense in Arizona was last year, what Kingsbury's spread offense has been in the past, and it's nowhere close to that for any one target. It is a spread offense in that the receivers are spread around the field and also the quarterback spreads the ball around. So I do think Hopkins will have a higher target share than any Cardinal did last year. I think he'll probably have a higher target share than any Kingsbury receiver has ever had. I don't think it's fair to expect that it's anywhere close to what it was in Houston just because that is such an outlier compared to other players. So I've dropped him down. I've got him he's still a number 1 wide receiver, but he's not somebody I'd take in the first round or in the first 18 picks.
So he's not a top 5 receiver for you.
No.
Still top 5 receiver for me at 5. I'm a little concerned. I may move him down a couple spots. I am concerned about the target share. I'm concerned about them spreading the ball around. I'm concerned. You're hearing some rumors maybe about his knee not being right, so that's something we have to keep an eye on. You don't trade away assets like this. I know we can make fun of Bill O'Brien, and that's going to be where the question becomes. But you don't trade away assets like this unless there's some concern about something. You know, we heard some stories, but some off-field things that he may have been dealing with, bringing stuff around the organization. Bill O'Brien had to sit down and talk to him. But it just makes me a little bit nervous that why are they making this move? Is there something that they know that great move for the Cardinals, but could it be something that's problematic? And so I'm a little bit concerned about him potentially putting up the same type of numbers. Obviously, Kyler Murray is a big winner in all this. We've all moved him up. Top 5 quarterback?
Third overall.
Third overall for
I
you?
got him 6th.
Okay, so 6. He's in the top 5 for me as well. So hopefully Kyler Murray benefits with this move. Christian Kirk, a big loser. Larry Fitzgerald, for what it's worth, still playing. Hurts him as well, but should be a fun offense to watch. And then when you look at what's left in Houston, how bad is this for Deshaun Watson?
Oh, it's pretty terrible. He was my clear number 3 quarterback before this, and now you're looking at a situation where he's got Will Fuller, he's got Kenny Stills, and he's got Randall Cobb. Stills has been very efficient. Maybe he gets a boost. Will Fuller's been very good when he's stayed healthy. Maybe he stays healthy. I still think because Watson is a very good quarterback, and Watson provides so much with his legs that you can view him as a top 8 quarterback. And with that receiving core, you would not view hardly any quarterback as a top 8 quarterback.
Still have to see what they do, obviously,
right.
Dave, but of the receivers, is Will Fuller your favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I've got him ranked the highest, but it's somebody that I'm not excited to draft.
What if I told you he's playing 16 games?
Then I would be excited to draft him.
So
I mean, that's the whole thing. You want him to be able to play every single week. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins was Mr. Reliable. You'd like Fuller to do that. I think Kenny Stills might be a good middle to late round pick. Maybe he picks up some of that slack. Remember, DeAndre Hopkins, about a third of his numbers each of the past 3 years was what got, it's Deshaun Watson's numbers. A third of them each year, DeAndre Hopkins accounted for. So it's a huge deal losing him. Someone's got to step up and take those numbers.
Yep, and so hopefully it'll be Will Fuller. Again, I think they'll be active in the NFL draft with the second-round pick that they did acquire from the Cardinals. Makes a lot of sense for them to make that adjustment and fix their receiving core. We know that the Vikings are going to have to adjust their receiving core because they made another splash move, trading Stefon Diggs. Much better compensation for Minnesota and what they got back for Diggs, a first-round pick, as part of the compensation from Buffalo. So Diggs goes to the Bills to play with Josh Allen. How much of a boost, if at all, is this for Diggs?
I think it could be a volume boost because even though Buffalo's a run-heavy team like Minnesota is, they still threw the ball a lot more than Minnesota did last year, and they're not quite as good as the Vikings are, so they find themselves in more situations where they have to. So I do think you could see a few more targets for Diggs. He's not going to be as efficient, though. I mean, last year was uncharacteristic even for him. Kirk Cousins is a much more accurate deep ball thrower than Josh Allen has been. I think it could be a small boost based on volume alone, but he's like right in that low-end number 2 wide receiver range.
Their target leader was John Brown at 117. Diggs had 94 targets last year. He did set a career high in yards per catch at 17.9, which tied for 4th in the NFL, which for a guy that throws the ball with what could be hopefully a few more deep shots, and Josh Allen, based on his arm strength, could help Stefon Diggs. But Dave, for Josh Allen, how important is this for him, and how much do you like him now even more?
He's still a top 12 fantasy quarterback, and I think that between his rushing prowess and getting this addition in the passing game, I think it's really good. But Josh Allen just has to bring the accuracy. He's got to be able to hit these targets, not just on the deep ball, but within 15 yards. And if he does that, miraculously somehow if he does that, he'll end up being an amazing fantasy quarterback and doing well for his receivers.
You would hope getting a pass catcher like Diggs would do that for him.
Well, he's got to be on target. That's the game.
The difference from what Diggs is dealing with, he went from Cousins, who was 69.9% completion rate, or 69.8% completion rate, to Allen, who was 58.8. So big drop off.
Yeah, I just think Allen was the number 9 quarterback in fantasy leagues last year with inaccuracy and with John Brown as his number 1 wide receiver. So I'm more optimistic. I think you look at where he and Kyler Murray, I had them back-to-back coming into free agency. They finished back-to-back last year. I moved Murray up to 6. I moved Josh Allen up to 5. He's my number 5 quarterback now. And I think with what he does on the ground, if he improves just a little bit and getting Diggs there catching passes from him, he could absolutely be a top 5 guy.
I'm guaranteeing we're going to see a lot more people because of the names chasing Kyler Murray and drafting Kyler Murray first. I would much rather wait for Josh Allen a round or two later, because I think the production could be very similar. And like you said, they finished back-to-back. They're back-to-back in terms of their rushing numbers too. Murray's slightly better than Allen. Allen was better in terms of scoring touchdowns on the ground. So if that continues, that'll be a big boost for both those quarterbacks, but obviously will help Josh Allen's value. A couple wide receivers are staying in their respective places. Amari Cooper and A.J. Green, you may have heard of them. They've put up some good fantasy numbers over the course of their careers. Amari Cooper's been better than A.J. Green of late because he's been healthy, but Cooper staying in Dallas, signed a big contract extension. I think he's having a good offseason, contrary to some people might believe. Cooper gets a $100 million over 5 years, $60 million of that guaranteed. Does this change anything for you about Amari Cooper?
Nah, still a top 15 fantasy receiver. That's where he was last year in PPR, in fantasy points per game, and in consistency. He was actually a little bit better than that in non-PPR. He finished top 11 in those categories. I think it's going to stay the same. All systems go in Dallas.
So Heath, NFC East is really beefing up their coverage. James Bradbury goes to the Giants. Darius Slay goes to the Eagles. Some pretty significant guys there in terms of what he's going to have to deal with. Darius Slay did a great job against him last year.
Right. It's going to be interesting to see what those teams do, because you look at this Cowboys passing attack, it wasn't just all Amari Cooper. Michael Gallup actually had more targets. So when they play those teams, they're going to be moving back and forth on different sides of the field. Are corners going to follow Amari Cooper, or are they going to figure, well, I'm either going to cover Cooper or Gallup? I think Gallup's emergence could help him deal with that a little bit. I'm not quite as optimistic in terms of him being a top 15 guy. I've got him number 17. He's going to have some great stretches, and he's going to have a couple of games where you just smack your forehead. But, he's a very solid number 2 wide receiver.
He's played 25 games with the Cowboys since the Raiders made the trade in October of 2018. He's averaging just about 16 PPR points per game over that stretch. Now, last year, though, his first 9 games, he was on pace to be a top 5 PPR wide receiver. Then he had knee and ankle problems, and as we know, did not finish that high, was still a top 10 wide receiver, but he struggled in the second half of the season, and I think that's what you're alluding to. Some good stretches, some bad stretches. Hopefully he plays 16 games of good stretches and we get great production. Hopefully we get 16 games out of A.J. Green. That hasn't exactly been the case. Missed all of the 2019 season with that ankle injury, but he gets the franchise tag to stay in Cincinnati. Now, he said different things about not wanting the franchise tag, what his plans will be. We'll find out if there is, in fact, going to be an NFL offseason, but he said he would skip the voluntary workouts and then show up for training camp. If that's the case, if they sign or if they draft Joe Burrow as expected, how do we view A.J. Green going into 2020?
I think he's got a chance to be the receiver that we remember him being before all these injuries and bad quarterback play and holds out. I know. I think he can still do it. He's still a very capable, very athletic wide receiver, and he's going to have a great quarterback in Joe Burrow throwing to him. Now, Burrow can make some mistakes. He's a rookie quarterback. That's what they do. But if he's back on the field, I'm optimistic that you can draft him as a middle to low-end number 2 wide receiver and potentially have a number 1 receiver by the time the season's over.
I'm terrified.
Really?
He's 32 years old, did not play last year, played 9 games the year before that. And he will have a quarterback that has the potential to be great one day in the NFL, but most recent evidence suggests that Joe Burrow is not going to be great as a rookie. We're going to hope that he's okay as a rookie. And then if we're going to go the entire offseason where the only work that Burrow's getting with NFL receivers with Tyler Boyd and John Ross and A.J. Green's not there, and he shows up a week before the season and he's going to have rapport with his quarterback, I think there is certainly upside that A.J. Green could regain that top 15 form. I'm drafting him as a number 3 wide receiver because the downside side is that he's lost it.
It's probably going to be very polarizing for a lot of people. We know how fantasy owners are. They're fickle. You burned me once, I'm staying away. Some people are going to obviously look at it and say, if I get him at the right price, could be a steal. So if you get him as a number 3 receiver, that's obviously amazing. The question becomes, do you be aggressive and take him as a starting option? One wide receiver we're probably not going to be taking as a starting option is Randall Cobb. He does now join the Texans. Now, don't say, because it's not fair, that he is replacing DeAndre Hopkins, because he's not. It's like Golden Tate going to the Giants last year. Did not replace Odell Beckham. He may have taken his locker. He may have taken his role on the field. He is not replacing that type of production. Any interest in drafting Randall Cobb this year, Heath?
No, I think he's replacing Kiki QT, and he didn't have much of a role last year, so there will be target opportunity. Cobb had a weird year in Dallas last year. He's always been that possession receiver close to the line of scrimmage, actually averaged 15 yards per reception, but he doesn't get into the end zone that much, and I would expect he's going to be behind both Fuller and Stills in terms of target share. He's a very deep option in best ball.
We're hearing some news about potentially Emmanuel Sanders going to the Cowboys. We know Robbie Anderson is still out there. If Sanders does sign with Dallas and then Robbie Anderson, is there a destination that could help either of those guys maybe become fantasy starters?
Fantasy starters, maybe if Robbie Anderson goes to Philadelphia, I'd be comfortable drafting him. I don't know if I'd draft him as one of the top 24 receivers, but as a guy, a number 3 receiver, potentially be a number 2, yeah, I could see that in Philly.
I could deal with Robbie Anderson in Houston. I think he'd be the number 1 there if he went to Houston.
They already have 2 guys that are kind of like him.
You can put Kenny Stills in the slot. He did that in Miami.
I mean, that would be an interesting passing offense, just to have 3 deep ball
Burners.
type of burners and just letting Deshaun Watson
More like, yeah.
all day long.
I think Philly is the likely landing spot for him, and hopefully that happens, and we'll break it down for you when it does, just like we're going to talk about what David Johnson going to the Texans means for his fantasy value, along with what Kenyan Drake now becomes in Arizona now that David Johnson is gone. Stay right here to Fantasy Football Today. We're talking running backs next. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're taking a look at the running backs that have been on the move in the last several days and some that have stayed put over the last several weeks, as we're talking about the free agent moves, not just this week, but some of the things that have happened this offseason. Guys like Derrick Henry staying put, guys like David Johnson being traded to the Texans. Who would have thought that anybody would take on this contract? Hello, Bill O'Brien. You love, apparently, what could be, I'm hoping, running back resurgence. And David Johnson, who in 2016 was probably the best running back in the NFL. 2018, 2019, not so much. All right, so let's talk about this. We know Lamar Miller gone as a free agent. Carlos Hyde gone as a free agent. They did make the trade for Duke Johnson last year, who still will be on the roster. But DeAndre Hopkins is gone. That was part of the trade here. Johnson goes to the Texans. DeAndre Hopkins goes to the Cardinals. Any interest at all in drafting David Johnson as a starter?
Possibly. As a low-end starter.
I don't need possibly. I need yes or no.
Yes. Yes, because you look at last year, Carlos Hyde has been one of the least efficient running backs in the NFL for the last 6 seasons. Just at 4.4 yards per touch, not even target or carry. So Johnson has always been better than Carlos Hyde. And Hyde last year had 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns. Like, even if he just goes into that role.
Basically not catching the ball.
Basically not catching the ball at all. Right. He's going to catch the ball more than Carlos Hyde did.
We hope.
So if he stays healthy and plays 16 games, I think you're probably looking at a 12 or 1,300 yard back, probably going to score 7 or 8 touchdowns, probably going to be a top 25 running back in fantasy.
Would you believe that he ranked 13th in consistency in PPR last year, David Johnson? It's because he got off to I'll use air quotes, hot start.
He was a top 10 running back.
17 or more PPR points in 5 of his first 6 games. So there is something there. You go back and you watch how he played last year. The first half of the year, he was passable. Second half, when he came back after the injury, he did not look good at all. So we got to hear some good news about David Johnson in training camp before we really buy into him.
This is one of those things that's going to be interesting, because how hurt was he? And was it that he was that injured, or was Kenyan Drake that much better? Because they made the trade to get Drake when he was banged up, and it was curious at the time because the Cardinals were in a playoff contender, and so why would they give up capital to get Kenyan Drake? And then it turns out, well, maybe they had this plan all along that they were going to try and get rid of him, of David Johnson, and it worked out for them to their benefit. So I think there's reason to be optimistic. It's similar to like we just said about A.J. Green. If you get him at the right price, it's worth the gamble. If you stretch to get him a little bit too soon, I think anything before round 5 is probably too soon.
I agree.
Round 6 or later, it's worth the gamble just to see, unless running backs just come flying off the board. and then we'll see what also the Texans do to maybe add a third guy to sort of help out with David Johnson and with Duke Johnson. So Kenyan Drake now stays in Arizona. He got the transition tag. Would be very surprising at this point that a team would try and acquire him. So he's going to be the starter for the Cardinals. Chase Edmonds will be the number 2 guy there. How much do we like Kenyan Drake? Because for me, I'm excited. I think he's a top 10 guy.
I love the raw numbers of how he did last year in the 8 games with Arizona. He averaged 100 total yards per game and a touchdown per game. But 40% of those yards and 6 of those touchdowns came in 2 games. So I'm wondering if he'll be a little bit too inconsistent from week to week. But I look at him and I think about this offense, and I think there's 1,500 yard potential there. 1,500 total yards for Kenyan Drake.
Averaged 19.1 PPR points in the 8 games that he was with the Cardinals. His final 3 over 17 PPR points. So some highs and lows early on, but he closed the season playing at a very high level.
Is there a rule on how many years in a row you can make Kenyan Drake a breakout running back? Because I think he's going to go for 3 this year. But last year was not the first time we've seen somebody give Kenyan Drake a workhorse role. The Dolphins did it a couple of years ago for the final 5 games, and he was absolutely awesome then as well. So I think this is going to be a pretty effective offense. Now they've got DeAndre Hopkins as well. The offensive line is going to be better than it was last year. He's a top 10 running back for me as well. I'd be happy to start him as a number 1. I think you could take him in the second round.
He had 4 games with 15 or more carries in Arizona. That was in half of a season. That's 1 more game that he had in his entire tenure with Miami, 15 or more carries. Only 3 times he did that with the Dolphins.
Yep, I'm going to actually draft him ahead of this guy, which is probably surprising to hear, but Derrick Henry led the NFL in rushing last year, was fantastic in terms of scoring touchdowns, over 13 for the 2nd year in a row, and I would take Kenyan Drake over Derrick Henry. Henry stays in Tennessee with the franchise tag. Is that crazy?
I think it's a little crazy. Yeah, I think the touchdowns are going to favor Derrick Henry for sure.
I'm concerned.
You're concerned about the workload. It's a huge knock against Derrick Henry. There's no question about it. But the way that he plays, you almost think that he's unbreakable. He's just going to continue to get a lot of volume in this offense.
If you watch enough NFL, there's nobody that's unbreakable.
There is nobody that's unbreakable, but this guy's hitting his prime. I think the Titans know what they want to do offensively. That's build around him. He told us at the Super Bowl that he wants to be more involved in the passing
Lost a
game.
big piece on the offensive line, too.
Yeah, but Jack Conklin's been on and off the field. I'm a little more optimistic than you are on Derrick Henry. And
so you're taking him in the first round still?
I would take him in the first round.
You too?
In non-PPR, I would. In PPR, I don't think it's crazy at all to take Kenyan Drake over him, because there's no way the Titans' offense is going to repeat the efficiency that they had from last year. And because they paid Tannehill and Henry so much, their defense isn't going to be as good either, so they're probably going to have to throw just a little bit more. I still think in non-PPR, it's going to be tough. He's such a freak in terms of his athleticism and size, and the fact that they want to run the ball 45 times a game. He has a perfect situation. I think he's going to be very good in non-PPR, a little worried in PPR.
I'm just concerned, and I know you're worried. 18 catches last year, so everything that he did was on the ground, and 16 touchdowns on the ground. It's hard to overlook that. Maybe the moving on from Dion Lewis increases his role in the pass game, which would be great, but in PPR, it's easy to take Kenyan Drake for me. Obviously, Dave does not share that sentiment. The Miami Dolphins, we know they're not done dealing with their backfield, but they did add a piece so far. So they signed Jordan Howard, who was with Philadelphia last year, the Bears the year before that. Howard had some good moments last year with the Eagles and then dealt with the injury, and Miles Sanders took over. So we know that Howard is not going to be the only guy in town, but for right now, let's just assume they don't spend a day 1 or day 2 pick on their backfield. Can Jordan Howard be fantasy relevant once again in 2020?
Sure could. Could be a great target as a 0 RB strategy type of rusher. We know the Dolphins have done a great job improving their defense. Their offensive line is going to be improved. They're going to try and shrink games a little bit and lean on the run. And I think Jordan Howard, at least to begin the season, can be a good fantasy running back. And I wouldn't be surprised one bit if week 1 comes along and he's your start of the week. It totally comes down to who they're playing in week 1.
He won't be the start of the week, Dave. I can tell you that right now.
But he could end up being a good running back to begin the year. So if you can get him past the midway point in your fantasy draft, I don't see the harm in it.
How significant of a rookie would it have to be to sort of even forget about Jordan Howard?
If it's a top 5 running back, I'm forgetting about Jordan Howard, like a top 5 rookie running back. So I do think there's a chance that they don't do that. They approach their taking. They may just go offensive line and defense and just continue to try to build that way. And if they do, then I think Howard has a chance to be a low-end number 2. But I would expect they're going to add someone of significance to the backfield.
And well, to your point, though, they moved on from Kenyan Drake last year. They tried with Kalen Ballage. They tried with Myles Gaskin. They tried with Patrick Laird. So they're not opposed to going with non-name guys or non-household variety type of players. So it could be something that Howard may be their best option. And he's still relatively young. I know we seem to think that he's been in the NFL for about 15 years, but not necessarily the case. Could still be a potential good fantasy option, more so in non-PPR leagues than PPR. I thought they actually would consider trying to take a flyer on this guy. The Falcons moving on from Devontae Freeman, who's a little bit more of a versatile back, as our colleague Pete Prisco likes to say, more of an air back. Freeman clearly trending in the wrong direction with his career injuries. 2 of the last 3 seasons. Last year was able to play the majority of the year, but did not produce at the highest level that we've seen from him. Any interest in Devontae Freeman if he ends up in the right scenario?
I think the best scenario would be as a passing downs back. That was the only area that he was even decent in last year with Atlanta. And if he goes to a situation like, I don't know, let's say he signs with the Dolphins and the Dolphins say, we're going to go with these 2 veterans. And Howard will be the early downs guy and Freeman is the passing downs guy. Then maybe before round 10, round 9, I would consider Freeman in a PPR league.
Yeah.
What's his dynasty value now?
Almost nothing, because he doesn't have. I don't think his chances,
only 27.
I don't think his chances of getting a 220 touch job in the future are very good. I'm not sure he can hold up to it, and he was pretty terrible as a runner the last time we saw him. So I think he's hoping he becomes a James White type or something like that, and that's just not that valuable in dynasty when there's not the upside of having that 1 year where they carry you as a must-start guy.
Perfect destination for him. San Francisco 49ers joining a empty backfield. But at least the coach knows him. Don't go to San Francisco. I know somebody who's on the move, and that's Austin Hooper. He's going to Cleveland. When we come back, we're going to look at the tight ends who have changed teams. And Hooper, the biggest name, going to the Browns. We'll tell you what his fantasy value is next here on Fantasy Football Today. Final segment of our free agency recap here on Fantasy Football Today, and we saved the best for last, the tight ends. That's right, we all love the tight ends. Except when they ruin us, right? Right? Right.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We love tight ends. Austin Hooper's on the move, going to Cleveland. Wants to play with Baker Mayfield, leaving Matt Ryan and the Falcons. Got a big chunk of change to do so. So he was a good fantasy tight end last season, great at others. Heath, you're not so thrilled about this move, though, for him.
No, there's not enough room. There's too many mouths to feed in Cleveland. I mean, you've got Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, David Njoku. They're going to run 2 tight end sets. Hooper was on pace for 115 targets last year. I mean, missed a few games. And even the target share that he had the year before that, there's not room for that in Cleveland right now. So I think you kind of have 2 ways to approach it. You can think Baker Mayfield's a top 5 quarterback again. They're going to throw the ball 600 times.
Please don't do that.
Or you can think this is bad for Austin Hooper, or you can tell me who you're going to downgrade out of Beckham and Jarvis Landry.
We don't know if Landry's going to be healthy to start the season. We've got a new head coach in Cleveland who's bringing a West Coast system. We've got a quarterback in Baker Mayfield who's thrown 35% of his touchdowns so far to the tight end position. And you have a tight end in Austin Hooper who was clearly the best available guy to Cleveland without them having to spend a ton of draft capital to get somebody in.
Spend a ton of money, though.
They did. I don't care. I think he's going to catch a bunch of touchdowns. I think he's the best of what's left at tight end once you get past the first 4 guys. Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, Mark Andrews. It doesn't mean I love him, and it doesn't mean I'm going to race to draft him. I'm probably going to wait for another tight end and go several rounds before getting one if I don't get one of those first 4. But I do think he'll come through with 8 or 9 touchdowns this year.
He's ranked 12th for you? 12th for you and 5th for you? Yeah, he's 7th for me. So I downgrade him a little bit. I don't love this move for him. I do like it for Baker Mayfield, though, getting another weapon of his caliber. Replacing Austin Hooper in Atlanta is Hayden Hurst as the Falcons make the trade with the Ravens. So Hurst has been a little bit of a disappointment, not a little bit, a big disappointment for Baltimore. He was drafted ahead of Mark Andrews. He was drafted ahead of Lamar Jackson. And we know those 2 players have been significantly better for Baltimore than Hayden Hurst, who's dealt with some injuries as well. But Heath, you're very optimistic about Hayden Hurst going to Atlanta.
Yes, because he's been a disappointment in fantasy. He's been a disappointment in terms of getting beat out by Mark Andrews. But when they've thrown him the football, it's turned out very well. They targeted him 62 times over the past 2 years. He's got 70% of his targets and averaged 12 yards per reception. That's outstanding. He's going to an offense with Dirk Cutter running it where they've thrown the ball 2 tight ends at least 120 times each of the past 3 seasons. There's not, at this point, another threat. And it's not just that they lost Hooper. They've lost Devontae Freeman, who they threw the ball 270 times. They threw the ball to Mohamed Sanu a bunch in the first half of last year.
The running back obviously is going to be replaced. What they do in the passing game, we have to see. So I understand where you're going from that standpoint. So we have to sort of wait to see this puzzle get put together. But Hurst, you're also optimistic about Hurst. You moved him up as well.
I am. I watched him play, and I think there's some similarities physically to Austin Hooper. I think he's a little bit faster than Austin Hooper. And if the Falcons are going to keep using this tight end role as a significant part of the offense, Hayden Hurst is going to get some numbers.
All right, there's two more transactions I want to bring up, but mostly because of the replacement options. So Jimmy Graham signs with the Bears. Don't draft Jimmy Graham. Please don't draft Jimmy Graham. But Graham's absence right now and the fact that Hooper goes to Cleveland opens the door for Jay Sternberger in Green Bay. We also have the Titans moving on from Delaney Walker and the Cowboys moving on from Jason Witten. Witten signing with the Raiders. So you have Sternberger in Green Bay. You got Jonnu Smith in Tennessee and Blake Jarwin in Dallas. Who's your favorite?
Jonnu, because I think that role could be really good for him there.
Jonnu and Jarwin are very close for me, but I'll take Jonnu over Jarwin. Cowboys threw the ball to their tight ends a ton last year, so I do think there's a good chance for Jarwin as well.
I'm with you on the order, too. I will say this about Sternberger, though. Could be very, very interesting if the Packers, as we see right now, Robbie Anderson's name is still out there. They have not added anybody yet to go opposite Devontae Adams. Right now it's Alan Lazard, and we know the cast of characters they had last year. Sternberger could be in a very, very good spot. So there's a lot of good young tight ends that you could be looking at. You could check out our rankings. Young tight ends and some old guys, too. You know, guys like Greg Olsen in Seattle, Jack Doyle still with the Colts. It's going to be a very deep position, deeper than we've seen in recent years. It doesn't mean a lot of great starting options, but it could mean some better options for you, not necessarily having to reach for Travis Kelce, George Kittle, or as Dave said, once you get past the top 4 or 5, could be a little interesting there. So this has been fun, guys. We're going to come back again on Friday, break down a little bit more of what's happening around the league, looking at some different positions. We're going to talk about running backs on Friday, a little bit more in depth for some of the moves. We're also going to be spending a lot of time on our Fantasy Football Today podcast. For Heath Cummings, Dave Richard, I'm Jamie Eisenberg. Thank you for watching Fantasy Football Today. Want more of the Fantasy Football Today podcast and nonstop year-round fantasy advice? It's simple. Hit the subscribe button and hang with us all throughout the year.